Greetings, my friends. My name is Anna Nichenko, and I'm glad to present for you the new episode of our daily wrap-up series. The Munich Security Conference begins today, where the war against Ukraine will undoubtedly be one of the main issues. And of course, the main debates will be about different visions for the future international order. Yes, they are often abstract and theoretical. By invading Ukraine, Russian President Vladimir Putin has made the clash of competing visions a brutal and deadly reality. The Munich Security Report 2023 explores intensifying authoritarian revisionism and the growing contest between different visions for the international order. It also stimulates the debate on how the coalition defending the vision of a liberal, rules-based order can be enlarged and strengthened. Usually, such large conferences can make an impact of political development as they define new standards of political discourse, political debate, and to some extent, the political mainstream of Western countries. And I hope that there will be such an impulse towards expanding the range of weapons that will be provided to Ukraine.
Instead of drawing red lines, I think we should pay attention to what is needed. Military experts say that a war like this requires a combination of several types of weapons. They need tanks, they need artillery, but they also need fighter jets, both to protect the airspace and to reach targets that artillery can't reach. We must make it clear that if Putin wins this war, it will not end in Ukraine. He himself, like his foreign minister, announced a few weeks ago that Moldova would be the next target. Ask the Baltic states. They expect Putin to deploy troops in their direction if successful. Therefore, we must be firm. We must continue to support Ukraine. Christoph Heusgen, chairman of the Munich Security, in the interview with Deutsche Welle.
45 heads of state and government, as well as 83 ministers of foreign affairs and defense, are to meet in Munich. The main Western forum on foreign and security policy began with an online speech by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, followed by speeches by German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and French President Emmanuel Macron. As in 2022, there will be no government delegation from the Russian Federation at the conference. Instead, representatives of the Russian opposition are planning to attend the event, including Garry Kasparov, Dmitry Gudkov, Yulia Navalny, Zhanna Nemtsova, Mikhail Khodorkovsky. The latter had already spoken at a meeting the day before the start of the conference itself, where said that Putin is now trying to suspend the war in order to build up strength.
It is clear that Putin is suggesting, leave what I have captured and let's talk about how to stop the war. Where does it lead? He will mobilize in the areas he has captured. There are 5 million people there. The mobilization potential is 500,000. And the cost of living of these citizens of Ukraine, whom he mobilized into his army, is politically zero for him. And they will be forced to fight against their fellow citizens. He now does not have time to conduct rocket attacks on Ukraine because his factories do not have time to produce weapons. He will prepare the weapons and he will start the war again. And what will happen in Ukraine at this time? And we understand watching Ukraine from the outside. What is the public consensus? Not an inch of land. What happens if Ukraine agrees to Putin's territorial claims? It will be not Finlandization, because there was no civil war in Finland. And here, if there is such a decision, Ukraine will rebel and Putin will take advantage of this. And he knows it very well. And those who are now calling to stop the war and come to an agreement with Putin, I don't know if they understand this or not, but they play into his hands. Stop the war in this way will not work. It will just turn out to make it even more bloody. The war can stop only by the victory of Ukraine.
In addition, the organizers of the Munich conference for the first time included Ukraine in the list of countries whose citizens are being polled to calculate the newly developed security index. Russia was previously on this list. According to the results of the study, 89% of Ukrainians are ready to continue resistance even after the use of the tactical nuclear weapons by Russia against the city. And one more figure, 93% of our citizens call the complete withdrawal of Russian troops, including from the occupied Crimea, a condition for a ceasefire. Such a paradox. Western intellectuals and politicians who advocate negotiations and compromises on the part of Kiev in relation to Moscow think that they are acting in the interests of ordinary Ukrainians. In their opinion, the Kiev leadership allegedly wants war, and ordinary people, Ukrainians, want peace. But we need victory, not peace. And as a victory for Ukraine will be the complete restoration of territorial integrity, including Crimea. Nowadays, more and more politicians in the West consider Crimea to be Putin's red line. But why? Why is Ukrainian territory already considered as Russian? What did Russia do for this? They simply supported this narrative in the world with her agents and controlled politicians. And to disable counter-information, they started a war in Donbass. That is, since 2014, Russia tried to declare that Crimea is their territory. And if someone started to deny this issue, then you immediately heard about Donbass, where the war was going on all this time. In this way, attention was diverted. It is not for nothing that Volodymyr Zelensky and the Ukrainian authorities launched the Crimean platform in 2021, an international platform that should work precisely on the return of Crimea, regardless of what is happening in Donbass.
Ukraine establishes and develops the Crimean platform as a key foreign policy tool to consolidate international efforts to deoccupy and restore Ukraine's territorial integrity, overcome the consequences of the Russian Federation's temporary occupation of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol, and protect the rights of Ukrainian citizens and citizens. Article 81 of a strategy for the deoccupation and reintegration of Crimea.
Along with statements about the supply of weapons from our partners, warnings about the territorial that the Ukrainians may retake are increasingly being sounded. So I'm more than sure that we are not going to seize Russian territory, at least for the simple reason that we are not Russians and respect international borders. We are not going to hit the Russian civil infrastructure. We will only take ours. And Crimea is ours, no matter how much someone in the Kremlin would like it to be otherwise. Yes, Western politicians are afraid that an attack on Crimea will provoke Russia into a nuclear strike. But the Crimean bridge has already been blown up. And according to Russian laws, the Kherson region is also part of their territory. However, this did not prevent the Russians from fleeing from the captured right bank of Dnipro in November under Ukrainian pressure. So what makes Crimea different? Yes, it will be more difficult to deoccupy due to the fact that it is a peninsula and the offensive will go through narrow land, crossing or with the help of a naval landing. But the Ukrainians are sure that we will also win back Crimea.
Мы можем с уверенностью сказать о том, что
We can say with confidence that the victories of the armed force of Ukraine, new breakthroughs, they will set in motion a lot of factors, including internal factors for Russia, the disorientation of the military political leadership of Russia, the behavior of large group of Russian population, which will face new waves of mobilization, and therefore it is now difficult to imagine how Crimea will be liberated. But the fact that this will take place at the stage of the tangible weakness of the Russia due to attack by the armed force of Ukraine is obvious to me.
But you know how will the liberation of Crimea ultimately end? The collapse of Russia. Because in addition to the fact that Putin imposed on the West the idea that the peninsula is Russian territory, he also introduced the same theories into Russian society. And they will not understand how it was possible to give the Russian territory to the Ukrainians. This will show the weakness of Putin and his regime. And Russia, as the country where prison laws and concepts prevail, does not tolerate weak leaders. They allow a strong hand and understand only strengths. Therefore, we will return Ukrainian Crimea by force. However, you know that is surprising. The Russians still believe that they will be able to achieve their goals, even after fleeing from Kiev, Kharkiv and Kherson regions, even after the destruction of the attack group near Vuhledar. There, the Russians are now changing their tactics. If earlier they planned to go with tanks and armored vehicles, now after the Ukrainians destroyed or damaged it, they use infantry more. At the same time, they have almost stopped assault and sabotage actions at night and are using this time to restore forces and raise reserves, said the spokesman of the Joint Press Center of the Defense Forces of the Tavria Direction, Alexei Dmitrashkivsky, on the air of the National Telethon. Previously, the Russians conducted harassing fire, sabotage, reconnaissance group and assault group were constantly working. Today, a different tactic is observed. At night, they try to recover, renew reserves. Personnel, and during the day, according to Dmitrashkivsky, the enemy uses artillery very powerfully, 223 times yesterday. The enemy also uses aviation. At the same time, the spokesperson noted that the occupiers will obviously continue their assault, as they have a task from the Putin regime to reach the border of the Donetsk and Luhansk region.
As to the further action of the enemy, whether they will continue, I think they will. But their actions have changed radically. They do not have the powers with which they started the assault and offensive in this direction. In my opinion, it will take quite a long time to restore so that they can fully attack. I think at least May, June. But the enemy will still constantly disturb this direction because they have a clearly defined task from their president. I think that the situation will change somewhat, but we will hold this position. Alexei Dmitrashkivsky, spokesman of the Joint Press Center of the Defense Forces of the Tavria Direction.
And while the Russians are preparing for a new attack, I hope that Leopards, Abrams, Challengers and other armored vehicles will already arrive in Ukraine. It is very necessary for us, and not only for defense, but also for attack. How motivated do you think the Russian military will be to continue fighting if there will be another defeat? It doesn't seem like much to me, especially since Russia has already lost about 200,000 wounded people, according to British intelligence, among which 60,000 were killed. Let me remind you that the Ukrainian General Staff generally reports on 140,000 killed Russians. But in what both our and Western information agree, the losses began to increase significantly after September 2022, when the Kremlin announced partial mobilization.
The last resource left in Russia is live cannon fodder. Everything else turned out to be just an information black and information deception of both their population, the whole world, and themselves. The Russian elites deceived themselves with what they thought, and they boasted to each other that they had the greatest resources, which are enough for decades of active war. They will not have any problems with this. And now it turned out that not even a year had passed since the start of a full-scale invasion, as they had already been feeling shell hunger for several months.
Of course, Russians learn from their mistakes. They no longer say that they will capture Kiev in 3 days or that Ukrainians will meet their occupying forces with flowers. But they still want to take at least a piece of land. Only if to this day most of the casualties are Russian soldiers who had relevant experience, then ordinary people who until recently were construction workers, IT workers or ordinary drivers will die on the battlefield. Do you imagine that these people know how to fight well and, most importantly, successfully? I'm not. Yes, you can say that there was a mobilization in Ukraine and not all people who are currently at the front are professional soldiers. But the Ukrainians have much more important things: the desire to fight for their country, for their land, for their relatives in a prosperous European country, not in a decaying empire. And that is why the victory will be ours. That concludes today's video. Thank you for watching and staying tuned for future videos. Goodbye.